sharing your story really helps you feel less alone. You feel like no one understands your pain. You feel like no one really could get it. And the minute you start sharing your story and then you hear other people share their stories, oh, wow, like there are people that understand this pain. And so it helps you feel a lot less alone.
Welcome to Healing with Tom Insel. I am Dr. Tom Insel, and I'm here today with Amanda Kloots. We've had conversations about the importance of healing as seen through the 3 Ps, people, place, and purpose. And what we're going to hear today with Amanda is one person's particular struggle with loss, grief, and recovery. So welcome, Amanda. Delighted to have you here. It's a real privilege to be able to talk to you. Let's start off by just having you introduce yourself and letting the audience know a little bit about your journey.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Hi, I'm Amanda Kloots. Gosh, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Ohio, was a Broadway performer for 17 or 16 years of my life, Broadway film and TV in New York City. And now I'm a Los Angelonian for the last 3 years. And television host and author, fitness company owner, mom, and where I have many jobs. I've been going through a grief journey for the last almost 3 years, after losing my beloved late husband, Nick Cordero, to COVID and the repercussions of what COVID did to his body.
Nick was a Broadway performer as well.
He was.
Tell us a little bit about what happened.
Nick and I were living here in Los Angeles. We were in New York, kind of packing up our apartment to do our official move into a home in Los Angeles that we bought together. We flew back here, and a couple of days after we got back, and this was like the very beginning of the pandemic, March 2020, Nick started feeling really tired. And that was really his only symptom. He was just tired, and he laid around the house for about a week before his symptoms got into kind of a cough and making his oxygen hard to breathe. So we took him to the emergency room, and he was admitted into the hospital at Cedars-Sinai and quickly admitted into the ICU, and then quickly put on a ventilator for support for his organs and his lungs to be able to rest and get some oxygen to his body. And from then on, it was 95 days in the hospital that everything kind of just kept going wrong, one thing after another, from him dying on the table to being resuscitated, put on ECMO, losing his right leg, having to need a pacemaker, having a feeding tube, a hospital infection on top of hospital infection, sepsis, and then ended up losing his life on July 5th, of 2020.
My gosh, what a saga. What was the journey for you? Because there was a long period where people couldn't visit family members with COVID. Were you caught up in that?
A little in the beginning, yes. And then because Nick was cleared of COVID pretty much 2 weeks after he was in the hospital. In fact, a week after we put him in the hospital, he was going to be put off the ventilator because his first COVID test came back negative after a week. So he was sort of COVID, healed, I guess you could say. COVID did a number on his lungs, though, so it was dealing with that. But yes, I was able to go visit him for the first time 2 weeks after we put him in the hospital because he was having his right leg amputated. They didn't think that he would make it through the surgery. So I was allowed in to say goodbye. And only because he was no longer on a COVID floor, he was no longer COVID positive. And it had nothing at the point, at the time to do with, the risk of getting COVID or Nick having COVID anymore.
But that sounds like 3 months of hell.
It was 3 months it was a mix of the most beautiful times and the worst times of my life. Those 95 days were they almost don't seem real now when I look back at them.
How did you manage?
I managed by the loving grace and wonderful help from my brother and my sister that kind of came down and rescued me. My brother, especially right away. And then my sister joined. And then eventually my mom and dad as well. Nick's mother also came and helped. And the love and support of the community here in Laurel Canyon and in Los Angeles was incredible. And also I had this enormous army on Instagram that also was a lifeline. So I had a lot of help in a time where we were completely isolated and alone. I had a ton of help and support.
Did you also have to be supporting people, children, other people in the family?
I had my little boy, Elvis, who was 10 months when Nick went into the hospital and then 1 when he passed away. Yes, I definitely was taking care of him. I was still breastfeeding Elvis, so there was a huge responsibility there. Luckily, as I said, my brother and my sister kind of took over the daily mom and dad duties. But every time I walked through that door, that little boy wanted his mama, and I was right back to being a mama and not being a wife. So it was a lot. A lot of times I felt like I was living 2 separate lives, or that I was bipolar. I would be coming home from the hospital in tears, and then I would walk through the door and wipe away my tears and start laughing and giggling with my son because that's what he needed. So it was a really weird time.
Had you had any other experience of loss like this when you were younger?
No, just, grandparents at an old age, that died, either from cancer or, peacefully in their sleep. But no, nothing like this. I had never spent this much time in a hospital, never once been in an ICU, never dealt with doctors the way I did, a hospital the way I did. I learned a lot very quickly.
You want to share a little bit of that with us?
Well, I learned that a hospital is a business. I don't mean that in a bad way, but it is a business with a lot of different members and people that you kind of have to go through in order to fight for your person that you love. I learned what hospital terms and medicines meant, and I learned what machines do and what machines need to be at levels that need to be taken care of. I learned that nurses are one of the most incredible occupations and people that you can ever meet. They work tirelessly, 12-hour shifts. They don't sit down. They know how to do everything. They care and love your patient, their patient, I'm sorry. I was in awe of the nurses, especially the ICU nurses that I met. They were just incredible people. I learned how important it is to fight and not give up and to stay positive in life. Those are some of the things.
Yeah. But there's nothing that can prepare you for this kind of a trauma. I mean, there's just there's no preparing.
No, there isn't. No. And I had 95 days to prepare for it. I was told Nick would die 4 different times throughout his hospital stay. So I was, in a way, sort of, grieving from day 1 that he went into the hospital and sort of preparing myself for a possible outcome of losing him. But yeah, the day that you decide to, pull the plug on your person is something you can't really prepare yourself for.
So tell us what's happened since, because what we really want to talk about in these conversations is how people can be so resilient, how under the worst of circumstances or with the worst of outcomes, people can still find ways to triumph and to recover. What's that been like for you?
Right away, I went into battle mode. I think I went to Ohio and rested with my mom and my dad. And I remember those days being, especially because I was out of the environment for the first time in over 3 months. I remember my goal each day was just to focus on doing one thing that made me happy. Just one thing. If that lasted 5 minutes, if it lasted an hour, if it turned into another happy thing, it was just my goal every day, one thing to make me happy. Those were like the first 2 weeks. And then when I got back to Los Angeles and had to really start dealing with packing up Nick's things, giving his things away, the business of death. Death is like, what are you doing with the body and what are you doing with the papers and all these people calling you and lawyers and money and situations and accounts. And it starts to be, you start to feel like this person's life is a business. And that was really hard for me. And I started to feel very, I equate it to feeling like an astronaut in space. Not that I've ever been one, but that image that we all know where there's an astronaut in his gear looking down at Earth and the astronaut's sort of just floating. I say that that's how I felt like a month after grief and for a little while, where I just kind of felt like I was in my little head helmet and I couldn't really understand anything or process anything. I just kind of felt like I was floating for a while. Once all of that kind of was situated, I think that's when I finally started to try to work on healing. Elvis helped me a lot. Obviously, my little son, you have to, they don't know the difference, so you have to get up every day and be a mom. And that really helped me actually move forward. Having a job, having somewhere to go every day really helped me. And then I would just say that, I'm on a constant healing basis. I'm always trying to find new ways to work through this trauma and grief, and find healing. And I've done all different sorts of things, from really, really wacky things to the traditional sit down and talk to a therapist things. Anything and everything that can, help me work through things and bring me peace.
We talk a lot here about healing as the 3 Ps: people, place, and purpose. Having social support, having an environment where you feel nurtured and where you get to recover, and then having a sense of purpose. And sometimes that means taking the worst of experiences and reframing and, allowing those to become a solution, or allowing those to become a foundation for doing something in a new way. Sounds like you've done a little bit of all 3: people, place, and purpose. I think you've got all of them there. I'm just curious about what's worked best for you. When you look back now, almost 3 years later, what's been the most important part of this?
I would say writing down my story, writing down the trauma. I started writing 2 weeks after Nick passed. And I would stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning, sobbing my eyes out, barely being able to look at the computer screen to see what I was writing. But I was just taking kind of what was in my head and writing it down. I had at the time said yes to doing a book deal about what I went through. So I was in a way kind of forced to write. But thank God I was, because it was so therapeutic and cathartic for me to take all of this information that was in my brain and let it out, take it out and put it somewhere. It was so helpful to my healing journey from the start. And then I truly do believe that when we share our stories, so then even when the book came out a year later, sharing your story really helps you feel less alone. You feel like no one understands your pain. You feel like no one really could get it. You feel very, trapped in that space. And the minute you start sharing your story and then you hear other people share their stories, oh, wow, like there are people that understand this pain. And so it helps you feel a lot less alone, which is super helpful. And then I would say that my last thing is that somebody told me, a person told me, and this is a reframing thing, to think of my time with Nick was an era of my life. And that era is never going anywhere. I always have that era, my Nick era. And yes, he passed, but now I'm in a new era of my life. And I can always look back on that era with the fondest memories and with all of the love that our relationship had, and getting married and having a child together and moving to Los Angeles. It's never going anywhere. And this is just now a new era that I am in my life. So that really, really helped me also, reframe loss.
Was therapy useful?
Yes. But I would say for me, the therapies that I've done that are a little bit more non-traditional have been more helpful to me than a traditional therapist. And I would say traditional therapy to me is sitting down with an actual therapist in a room or over Zoom and talking about my trauma. So far, non-traditional therapies, energy work, healing work, that kind of stuff has been a lot more helpful to me than traditional therapy.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Like what is it that you did that you thought was really useful? One
of the first things that I did was work with an I don't know what his exact title would be, but like an energy chiropractic worker. He doesn't really even touch you. It's a lot of cranial sacral work, but removing trauma that's stored up in your body, and that release of that energy that is in your body and taking it out of you. And so I was on a table, like a massage table, and he worked on me for almost 2 hours from like 4 to 6 feet away from me, not even touching me, but I had to shake at times. I was like moving a lot at times. I was in a cold sweat at times. I was passed out sometime. But I woke up and I felt like a different person. I felt like I had released a lot that was stored up in my body and released out of my body so that it was kind of free. I don't really know how else to explain it, but it was life-changing. One of the best things I've ever done for myself.
Yeah, interesting to hear how that worked for you and what a difference it made. Other things that you thought were, you mentioned the importance of having Elvis and having a purpose and a role, and as difficult as that was, how that was also focusing and critical for you.
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, Elvis was one, and then he just, keeps getting older and keeps getting cuter and cuter. And so it was wonderful. He would fall asleep with me. We would sleep together, and I would wake up to his little smiley face every morning. I mean, it's nothing better than rolling over and seeing your little boy who's just like smiling at you and wanting to give you hugs and kisses. I mean, we've become this like little team together. And it was hard too, because Elvis and I moved into the house that Nick and I bought together. That was supposed to be our first, family home. And we moved in without Nick. So it was hard, I mean, that transition was very tough. And so, we just had to find our way together, Elvis and I. But yes, having to feed him and change him and teach him and care for him gave me a purpose, gave me a meaning, and made me feel less alone as well. And so he really did save me.
Amanda, catch us up. So where are you now, 3 years later? What are you doing?
Where am I now? I work a lot. I have a lot of jobs. I'm a television host, and I just came out with a children's book and my second book, and I write and create movies and television shows. I try to live my life very full and immediate, because I think death teaches you that. It teaches you how to live. It teaches you that you might not have tomorrow, so do things today and live your life to the fullest. As far as like my grief journey, I think grief for me is ever changing. It's some days are still really hard. Some days are okay. Some days I can talk to Nick like he's right here with me and he's my best friend. And other days I, can't even bear to think about the loss. But for me, it's just always about moving forward. I just try to keep moving forward. And I like to think about what would Nick want me to do. I think that's another way I reframe his loss is, how can I honor him? How can I live my life so that it makes him proud? I think about how much he wishes he could be a dad and be here on this earth still, and take advantage of all the beautiful things that we can do in this world and in our lives. So I just try to live that way.
You're really impressive in the resilience you have and the way you've been able to build on this awful, awful event. And obviously, with the pandemic, you're not alone. So many people have lost people they love. Nick's a little unusual that he's so much younger than most of the people who've died, but I was just noticing the other day, there've been over 8,000 deaths of people under the age of 30 from COVID. So
Wow.
it's a virus that has affected so many people in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
A question that we like to think about in these sessions is, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, besides maybe wanting to make sure that you always had a face mask on and that everybody in your life would be avoiding COVID, what would you tell yourself now that you know that you may not have known before?
Tom, I think about this question a lot. And I know I could have many different answers to this question, but I think the most honest answer for myself is I would tell myself nothing, because I think that what we learn from going through life is more important than knowing something beforehand and figuring out how to deal with it. I think we have to go through these things in life, the trials, the tribulations, the ups, the downs, the roller coaster of what the world brings us. It makes us who we are. It has changed me time and time again. The person I was 3 years ago is not the person I am now. The person I was 6 years ago is not the person I am now. I've had I feel like 19 lives and in 41 years. And I love all of them. And even though right now life is challenging and hard, and 3 years ago it was really, really challenging and hard, the person that it has made me, I wouldn't sacrifice that by knowing something before. So I wouldn't say anything. Is that a weird answer?
I love that answer because it comes with a certain wisdom. And that's kind of what I take from your story, is that you've been able to incorporate this experience and grow from it in a way that's made you more wise. And I had a recent experience like this in my own family, and somebody said to me, "Hey, man, you're mortal. We're mortal."
Yeah.
And I have to say, I hadn't really thought about that much, but you've had to think about that. And being able to grapple with that and use that is so important. And it's actually, in some ways, a gift as much as it is a tragedy. Thank you so much for being with us. I really enjoyed hearing about this whole experience. And as difficult as it's been, it's inspiring to hear how you've been able to triumph and to move forward at the same time that you haven't had to give up or forget.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us, and good luck. You really are an inspiration.
Thank you very much.